This is Mike from fearshop.com. Make sure you like this video and leave your comments. Also, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell to set up notifications so you know when the next video drops. Now let's get into it. We're talking about the top 10 greatest zombie horror movies of all time. Whether they are fast zombies or slow zombies, these undead horror movies are my favorites. Zombie movies have had a fascinating path to the mainstream. For decades, the creatures didn't have much of a presence or definition outside of voodoo lore, radioactive humanoids, and the unforgettable art of DC Comics. Zombies were scarcely used, and when they were pretty far cry from the cannibalistic, flesh-hungry creatures of the undead we know and love today. Then a gentleman and pioneering filmmaker named George A. Romero came along and changed that game forever. Romero didn't invent the zombie, as he's so often credited, but he did redefine it into a universal concept and established a mold from which nearly every other zombie movie that has sprung in nearly 50 years since Night of the Living Dead arrived in theaters. Throughout his career, he would continue to evolve the idea of the zombie film, first with his satirical Dawn of the Dead, then with the divisive and political Day of the Dead, and ultimately for the rest of his career. Never satisfied to repeat his previous work, Romero was always ahead of the curve, reacting to the world and cinematic landscapes around them to set new trends. But zombie movies are more than just Romero films, so let's see what we have on this list. And before we get into the top 10, let's have a look at some of our honorable mentions. First up is Zombie 2 from 1971. And you can tell this is going to be an amazing list when Zombie 2 is one of the first honorable mentions. So Zombie vs. Shark. It's really, I should have to say, Zombie 2, titled Zombie in America, isn't really a sequel. In a marketing gimmick, it was built as a semi-sequel to George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, titled Zombie in Italy. But beyond spectacular zombie effects, the two actually have very little in common, narratively or tonally. Zombie 2 follows Ann Bowles, played by Tia Farah, a young woman who heads off to a remote island to help her ailing father, unaware that the land is under a voodoo curse that brings the dead back to life. Helmed by giallo maestro Lucio Fulci, Zombie 2 brings stylistic first-rate zombie action. Fulci's no stranger to the zombie genre, but Zombie 2 was his most conventional approach to the living dead before he got veered in a paranormal and interdimensional with his unofficial trilogy with City of the Living Dead, The Beyond, and A House by the Cemetery. Zombie 2 boasts some of the most inventive and flawless rendered zombie pieces of all time. Next up is 28 Days Later from 2002. 28 Days Later redefined the zombie aesthetic for a generation of filmmakers. Directed by Oscar-winning Danny Boyle from a script by brilliant sci-fi scribe Alex Garland, 28 Days Later rubbed zombie purists the wrong way at first. For one thing, they weren't technically zombies, but humans infected with a feral rage virus, and as a result, they moved way too fast. Purists scoffed, but audiences around the world discovered a new approach to the beloved genre that has not only endured, but became one of the most influential modern entries in the genre. Boyle crafted a new image of the viral apocalypse, a savage, bloodthirsty virus that sweeps through the world, leaving a broken, infested shell behind. 28 Days Later is so successful because it's as tender as it is terrifying, matching moments of horror with humanity and a healthy splattering of cultural commentary along the way. Next up is Zombieland from 2009. Ruben Fleischer's Zombieland is an interesting comedy horror akin to Shaun of the Dead. Zombieland arrived in theaters in 2009 towards the end of a new zombie boom, and it's a film made for audiences who already know the rules of surviving a zombie apocalypse and want to have some fun playing the game. The script comes from Deadpool screenwriters Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick, and as you can see, the same tones that you see in Deadpool. The ensemble comedic performance of Emma Stone, Woody Harrelson, Jesse Eisenberg, and Abigail Breslin have a blast doling out verbal beatdowns in between actually beating down the undead. And I'm not going to spoil the classic cameo that happens in the movie. Next up is The Return of the Living Dead from 1985. Blood, boobs, and brains. Dan O'Bannon's The Return of the Living Dead is a triple threat of zombie B-movies, and without a doubt, it's the most fun you can have hanging with the undead. After a pair of fumbling medical warehouse employees accidentally unleash toxic gas on a nearby cemetery, the dead return to life in ghoulish, grisly fashion with an insatiable hunger for brains. The directorial debut from Alien and Total Recall screenwriter Dan O'Bannon, Return of the Living Dead is a zombie film and a party rolled into one mud-smeared punk rock romp. Long before the meta-horror trend, Return of the Living Dead name-dropped for its inspirations, openly, casually referencing Night of the Living Dead without abandon. It's an outrageous film from start to finish, including iconic moments like Linnea Quigley's new grave dancing scene, a morose talking zombie, and slimy, gory creature effects. Return of the Living Dead is over the top and gleefully tongue-in-cheek, like an EC comic come to life. A hard rockin' response to Romero's Living Dead films that had become a classic in its own right. Last honorable mention is Cemetery Man from 1994. Directed by Dario Argento protege Michel Soavi, Cemetery Man, also called Della Morte Dell'Amore, is a weird head trip of a movie that treats the living dead as more of a nuisance than a deadly threat. Based on the comic series Dylan Dog, Cemetery Man stars Rupert Everett as Francesco Della Morte, a misanthropic gravedigger who prefers the company of the dead to the living. There's just one catch: the dead won't stay buried in his graveyard. When he meets a stunning widow played by Anna Falchi at her husband's funeral, Della Morte falls head over heels, courts her, and before you know it, they're naked on top of her dead husband's grave. That's just where things start to get weird. Now on to the top 10 list, and we're going to start it off with Dead Snow from 2009. With so many zombie movies over the years, eventually you're going to run out of ways to freshen up the subgenre. Enter Tommy Wirkola's decidedly skewed take on zombies in this horror comedy with plenty of gore. Sure, zombies are great movie monsters, but if you have Nazi zombies, will you just double down on the level of villainy in your film? This splatterfest puts a Nordic spin on the traditional zombie by adding in elements of the Jagar, an undead creature from Scandinavian folklore that fiercely protects its treasured hoard. In the case of Dead Snow, these Jagar happen to be former SS soldiers who terrorized a Norwegian town and looted their belongings, only to be done in or chased into the freezing mountains by the villagers themselves. Dead Snow is funny, gory, and satisfyingly violent movie with elements of Evil Dead and slasher flicks scattered throughout, and if you like it, there's more where that came from in the sequel, Dead Snow: Red vs. Dead. Number 9 is Dead Alive from 1992. Peter Jackson could have only made Dead Alive a gory, gushy, and occasional outright repulsive zombie film, and he would still be kind of a legend. Of course, he also brought Lord of the Rings to the big screen. Dead Alive tells a tale of Lionel, played by Timothy Baum, who falls in love with a local girl, and how he is no longer held down by his controlling mother, played by Elizabeth Moody. Out come the decaying zombie-like creatures to act as a horrifying expression of Mama's villainous control. Dead Alive, also known as Brain Dead, is a melding of slapstick and physical comedy with horror, and the result is the most idiosyncratic and zany effort that Jackson produced, complete with zombie monster mama and rotted ears and noses garnishing a nice Sunday chowder, and a priest adept at martial arts who kicks ass for the Lord. Number 8 is Pontypool. Pontypool earned some style points for being a different kind of zombie film. It's not a virus that spreads through a small town. It's a language with people repeating the same word or phrase over and over until they turn into horrible rage monsters. It has all of the gore you would expect of a zombie film, but it will keep you thinking long after the credits have rolled. The elements that have gore are pretty amazing. The parts where it's just a couple characters in the radio studio and you're using your imagination might even be better. Number 7 is Dawn of the Dead from 2004. These days, Zack Snyder is known for being the architect of Warner Brothers' DC Comics live-action movie universe, but it wasn't always this way. Before Man of Steel, Watchmen, or even his claim to fame 300, Snyder turned in a terrifying, modernized account of Romero's 1978 original by the same name. Oddly enough, Marvel movie maker James Gunn also contributed his screenwriting talent to this film. Snyder's version boasts vast zombies, which are terrifying but different from the original. It wasn't the first film to implement a twist on Romero's modern zombie, but Snyder takes on the fast zombies were quite the surprise since they appeared in the Night of the Living Dead universe. If you're going to write this one off or have never seen it, definitely put it on your list. Number 6 is Night of the Living Dead from 1968. George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead is far from the first zombie movie, but it's the first to move beyond using atomic radiation more or less, and do away with alien invasions to give us the modern version of zombies as reanimated corpses who hunger for flesh. For the last 50 years, that's the model that zombie movies have, in all media, have been built from, including Romero's own sequels to this seminal film. The original still holds up today, not because of dazzling special effects or incredible acting, but because of social themes Night of the Living Dead attempted to skewer. The undercurrents of racial prejudice, vigilantism, mob mentality, and cowardice in the face of difficulty continues to hit hard 50 years later, since these crimes are common human attributes throughout history and we're still attempted to overcome today. In subverting everything that defines life as a human, Romero was able to explore humanity at its least humane. Often imitated, rarely duplicated, Night of the Living Dead remains a contemporary horror classic. Number 5 is Shaun of the Dead from 2004. When it comes to advance in the zombie movie genre, Edgar Wright's Shaun of the Dead stands out amongst the crowd. It's both a warm-blooded love letter to the history of zombie films and a stone-cold laugher that takes shots at those very same films. It helped quite a bit that Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg enjoyed a shorthand from working together on the TV series Is It Bill Bailey, and Spaced before collaborating on what is arguably the best zombie comedy out there today. Shaun of the Dead didn't just take the zombie movie tropes and run with them. It allowed Wright's meticulous attention to detail and brand of humor, complemented by Pegg's delivery, to bubble to the surface. It's one of the most rewatchable movies out there, because you'll always find something new that you may have missed dozens of times before. Number 4 is 1985's Re-Animator. There are just not enough quality movie adaptations of H.P. Lovecraft's works out there. One of the best happens to be Stuart Gordon's Re-Animator, taken from Lovecraft's early 1920s horror short, Herbert West's Re-Animator. This tale was one of the first instances of zombies as scientifically reanimated corpses, driven by primal needs. Re-Animator certainly takes the premise to the extreme in this film that launched a trilogy and became a cult classic. Centering on Herbert West, played by the amazing Jeffrey Combs, a medical student of questionable morals and who's developed a reanimating serum. Re-Animator is a tongue-in-cheek zombie film that's not afraid to push the envelope, and in great performances by Bruce Abbott and Barbara Crampton, zombie cats, a reanimated severed head, violation of corpses in the morgue, gruesome deaths by decapitation and bone saw, sexual assault by zombie, and a rather gory final battle. It's definitely not for the faint of heart or easily offended, but it's a must-watch. Number 3 is Wreck from 2007. Found footage films have gotten a bad rap over the years, but there are a few highlights of the trend, including 2007's Wreck. It followed a news crew venturing into a quarantine building where a zombie outbreak has occurred. It's one of the few films where the found footage aspect works really well. You feel just as claustrophobic as the characters, making for a tense, engaging experience. Number 2 is Day of the Dead from 1985. The concluding chapter in George A. Romero's original Dead trilogy, Day of the Dead has never found the frenzied fans of its two predecessors. In fact, it's often been met with some harsh criticisms, which is unfortunate because it's a staggering zombie film in its own right. Perhaps it's the idea of sentient zombies, a tenet of Romero's later Dead films, introduced in Day of the Dead via Bub, the lovable, flesh-hungry fiend who begins to show signs of cognizance during military testing. Or maybe it's the script, which turns up the volume on Romero's trademark cultural critique, bleeding into the preachy territory. But while other filmmakers may have been happy to recreate the formula that worked for them in the past, Romero consistently evolved his Living Dead films. Day of the Dead was the boldest of them all. Set on a military base, Romero gets downright political, asking hard questions about power and how much any one organization should or can ever have. It's a pensive film, not quite as primal as Night of the Living Dead, and nowhere near as funny as Dawn of the Dead, which makes it a slow watch. But if you came for the zombie gore, the payoff is rewarding. Day of the Dead has some of the most stomach-churning, sticky practical effects in the history of horror. And number one, with no surprise to anyone most likely, is Dawn of the Dead from 1978. George Romero didn't invent the zombie, but he did single-handedly create the template for the modern zombie films as we know with Land of the Living Dead. For his sequel, Romero dodged the temptation of retread familiar territory, a quality he would maintain for each of his subsequent Dead films, ditching the intimate confines of a home for the sprawling reaches of a shopping mall, and trading his black and white bleakness for a playful, color-saturated palette. Dawn of the Dead's a horror sequel in every sense, bigger and bloodier, but it maintains Romero's commitment to piercing social commentary, this time tackling the insatiable lust of American consumerism. It's also packed to the brim with Romero's skilled eye for visceral violence, rendered with first-rate old-school gore effects from Tom Savini, the legendary craftsman of carnage. As in all of Romero's great work, that beautifully executed bloodshed is only a backdrop for a compelling character drama as a group of strangers seeking refuge in an abandoned shopping complex cope with increasing interpersonal conflict. What a lot of people get wrong with zombie movies is zombie movies actually aren't truly about the zombies. It's about people and their relationships and how they react to the situation. And they just happen to be in a world filled with zombies. That's what Romero did so well. That's what a lot of the films on this list have done. It's not just about the gore. So that wraps this film up. I want to hear from you. Post your top 10 greatest zombie movies of all time in the comments below. Let me know which movies in my list you agree with and which ones you disagree with. Also let me know what top 10 lists you'd like me to make. That's it for this episode. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you share this video. Make sure you subscribe. But most of all, keep it horror.